Hang on.
Did you communicate?
You asked the question. Let me answer it.
No, let me.
No.
Did you communicate with anyone that you thought you were fired after you were unable to log into?
The problem with you and your report. Don't cut me off. You asked the question.
Straightforward question.
The problem with you and your baseless reporting is that is an absolute lie.
I do want to give you an opportunity to respond directly to the allegations in the Atlantic article that your unexplained absences created a national security risk. And beyond that, can you say definitively that you have not been intoxicated or absent during your tenure as FBI director?
I can say unequivocally that I never listen to the fake news mafia. And as when they get louder, it just means I'm doing my job. This FBI director has been on the job twice as many days as every director before me. What that means is I've taken half as many days off as those before me. What that means is I've taken a third less vacation than those before me. What that means is that this FBI...
What's happening, people? Welcome to Dr. John Podcast. Again, so let's get started. Kash Patel just suffered a spectacular courtroom defeat. Hours after filing a $250 million defamation suit against The Atlantic, a separate defamation case he initiated was dismissed outright in a Texas courtroom. Not delayed, not partially dismissed, gone. The man handpicked to weaponize the FBI against his enemies just had his own legal weapon blow up in his hands, and the judge's reasoning was devastating.
With this Department of Justice has dropped the murder rate 20 points. What that means is this FBI, with this Department of Justice, has captured 8 of the top 10 most wanted fugitives in the world, twice as many as the Biden administration did in its entire 4 years. What that means is this FBI has seized enough fentanyl off the streets to kill 178 million Americans, a 31% increase. What that means is this FBI and this DOJ has arrested 43% more spies in 14 months than the entirety of the Biden administration. What that means is this FBI has seen a reduction in opiate overdose deaths up to 20% alone. What that means is that we have found 6,300 child victims, 6,300 families have their kids back. That is a 22% increase from the Biden administration. I'm on the job. I'm the first one in. I'm the last one out. I'm like an everyday American who loves his country.
Let's set the stage here because this sequence of events tells you everything you need to know about how Kash Patel operates and why his reign at the FBI has been marked by chaos from the very beginning. The Atlantic published an extensive investigative article that painted a deeply unflattering picture of Patel's tenure at the Bureau. The reporting alleged serious misconduct.
Loves the sport of hockey and champions my friends when they raise a gold medal and invite me in to celebrate. I've never been intoxicated on the job, and that is why we filed a $250 million defamation lawsuit. And any one of you that wants to participate, bring it on. I'll see you in court.
Explain the computer login issue. Just explain the computer login issue. You were not able to log into your lawsuit contends that you were not able to log into the system. What did you think after you were unable to log into the system?
Let's have a survey. How many of you people believe that's true? Hang on.
Did you communicate?
You asked the question. Let me answer it.
No. Did you communicate with anyone that you thought you were fired after you were unable to log into?
The problem with you and your report. Don't cut me off. You asked the question.
Straightforward question.
The problem with you and your baseless reporting is that is an absolute lie. It was never said. It never happened. And I will serve in this administration as long as the president and the attorney general want me to do so.
Chronic absenteeism from his duties, repeated episodes of what sources described as genuine drunkenness, a pervasive paranoia about being fired from his own position, and an overall pattern of ineffective management that left the FBI rudderless during a critical period.
And every time you guys report false lies, every time you guys raise baseless questions, when we are here to talk about the Southern Poverty Law Center's $3 million decade-long scheme to fraudulently fleece Americans, you are off topic.
It's a simple, straightforward question. Did you talk to anybody about whether you thought you were fired?
The simple answer to your question is you are lying, and every time you do so, I've answered your question. It's simply as follows. I was never locked out of my systems. Anybody who says
your lawsuit says the opposite. Your lawsuit contends.
Anyone that says the opposite is lying. Thank you.
The lawsuit that you filed says that directly.
Man, stop. You're being extraordinarily rude. And I know maybe that's part of your profession, but please just stop. If you ask a question, he can answer it. And then wait, now you're interrupting me. Like, just a little bit of respect, man. Just a tiny little bit. Try it sometime.
These weren't vague suggestions whispered by anonymous cowards. These were detailed accounts from multiple sources who had direct knowledge of what was happening inside the Hoover building. Patel's response to this damaging exposé was completely predictable to anyone who has watched his playbook. He didn't address the substance of the allegations. He didn't provide evidence countering the claims about his conduct. He didn't hold a press conference laying out his side of the story with documentation and witnesses.
FBI Director Kash Patel. Today, I'm going to walk over to see Jake Rosen, my friend and colleague, Justice Department reporter. Let me get the copy here in front of me on the teleprompter. Kash Patel today filed a $250 million defamation lawsuit against the Atlantic magazine. In a new piece, the magazine said Patel has, quote, alarmed colleagues with episodes of excessive drinking and unexplained absences. Jake, you're here. You're under no time constraints. Just tell me what happened with the story and then what the defamation lawsuit alleged.
Well, that's right. This story cited over a dozen people that this reporter, Sarah Fitzpatrick, says that she spoke to both in the administration and out, both who worked with Kash Patel every day and knew and were familiar with what his tenure as FBI director has been like. It alleges that not just has he drank too much on the job from time to time, that we should point out to our audience, CBS News has not independently verified and confirmed these anecdotes that are in this piece. But what it has also really brought up was the national security concerns that have arisen because of it. And that's what the center part of this piece was, is that at critical moments in time when FBI directors are needed.
Instead, he reached for the nuclear option immediately. He filed a $250 million defamation lawsuit against The Atlantic, attempting to crush the publication under the weight of legal fees and intimidation tactics. This is classic Patel behavior. When faced with criticism, when confronted with reporting that damages his reputation, his instinct is never to engage honestly. His instinct is to attack, to threaten, to try to bury his critics under mountains of litigation until they either run out of money.
Kash Patel has not been around. He's not been present at FBI headquarters here in Washington, and he has not been available in field offices when he's gone to visit them. Details drinking in places like Las Vegas, Washington, D.C., and that there were concerns by people who work with him every day that he just was not quite up for the job, at least according to the officials who this reporter
And there's
spoke
an element of the story that suggests he's nervous about his own job status.
Yeah.
Kash Patel.
Yeah, and I think The Atlantic and this same reporter, Sarah Fitzpatrick, reported after Pam Bondi's ouster that Kash Patel's name was potentially next on this list of people who not quite have lived up to President Trump's expectations. I think
and then could be fired.
And this is
and he has some nervousness about that.
Absolutely. And this is the incident and the lead of the story is that Kash Patel went to go log in a routine logging in on Friday night 2 weeks ago, was not able to log into his account and assumed that he had been fired because he had not gotten access. That was never the case, and allegedly, at least according to this piece. However, there was reporting in this piece that Kash Patel called people suggesting that he had been fired. That rumor never came to light, at least according to our CBS.
And what does the defamation lawsuit?
Or lose the will to fight. But here's where the instant karma enters the picture. While Patel was busy drafting his $250 million assault on The Atlantic, another defamation lawsuit he had previously filed was quietly working its way through the Texas court system. This earlier case targeted Frank Figliuzzi, and if that name sounds familiar, there's good reason.
Well, it alleges 17 different points that Kash Patel and his legal team are alleging are wrong in this story. They range from accusations of drinking on the job, from accusations of potentially needing his security detail who watches him every day. It's FBI officers protecting him. It's not traditionally like the Secret Service apparatus that protects political appointees and cabinet secretaries, that they've needed some gear to potentially breach locked doors. All of that is singled out by Patel and his legal team.
As being false.
As being false. And they're claiming that the very high bar here that needs to be reached in this suit has been met, which is that The Atlantic and this reporter, Sarah Fitzpatrick, have moved on this and with actual malice, which means major.
Which is the legal standard.
Right. Yes. And a very high one. And we just saw last week.
That you know it's wrong. And even though this is a public figure and public figures have a different standard, you know it's wrong and you publish anyway, and that's actual malice, and that's what the defamation suit alleges.
Figliuzzi is a former high-level official at the FBI, someone who spent years climbing the ranks of the Bureau and understanding its inner workings from the inside. He's been a regular fixture on MSNBC and various news programs, offering expert analysis on law enforcement matters and specifically on Bureau operations. In fact, if you've noticed his absence from the airwaves airwaves recently, now you know exactly why. This very lawsuit has kept him sidelined, unable to appear on the networks where he built his reputation as a trusted voice. Presumably that changes immediately now that the case has been dismissed. So what did Frank Figliuzzi actually say that prompted Kash Patel to drag him into court? The answer reveals everything about how Patel interprets criticism and why his legal strategy is fundamentally flawed. Figliuzzi appeared on Morning Joe for an interview about Patel and the FBI. The host asked him a straightforward question about Patel's visibility, noting that the new FBI director seemed less publicly present than many people had expected. Figliuzzi's response was the kind of pointed commentary that political analysts make every single day on cable news. He said, well, reportedly, he's been visible at nightclubs far more than he has been on the 7th floor of the Hoover building. That's the statement. That single sentence became the basis for a defamation lawsuit that has now been thoroughly rejected by a federal judge. Notice the careful language Figliuzzi used. He said reportedly, which immediately signals to any reasonable listener that he's referencing things that have been said in the media, not presenting first-hand eyewitness testimony. He's summarizing a media narrative, not claiming personal knowledge of Patel's whereabouts. The statement is, importantly, entirely congruent with the much more detailed and extensively sourced allegations that would later appear in the Atlantic article. That reporting described Patel frequenting establishments in Washington, D.C. and Las Vegas, drinking heavily, and generally comporting himself in ways that raised serious questions about his fitness for the position he held. Patel's argument in the lawsuit was simple, but ultimately self-defeating. He claimed the statement was demonstrably false on its face. Taken literally, word for word, he argued that he has not spent more time in nightclubs than in his office on the 7th floor of the Hoover building. If you read the statement like a computer program, stripping away all context and nuance and human understanding, you could technically argue it's not literally true that more hours were spent at nightclubs than at the office. But here's where defamation law reveals its sophistication and where Patel's legal theory completely falls apart. The court didn't evaluate Figliuzzi's statement the way Patel wanted them to, as a mathematical equation to be proven or disproven. The court applied the standard of how a reasonable person actually processes language in the real world. This is where the concept of rhetorical hyperbole enters the picture, and it's absolutely central to understanding why Patel lost and why his entire defamation crusade appears built on legal quicksand. Rhetorical hyperbole is a well-established doctrine in defamation law. It recognizes that human beings don't speak like legal documents. People use exaggeration to make points. People employ colorful language to communicate ideas. People understand that when someone says, "I'm so hungry I could eat a horse," they aren't literally planning to consume an entire equine. The law protects this kind of speech because protecting it is essential to the First Amendment's guarantee of free expression. Without this protection, every politician, every commentator, every citizen would face constant litigation for using figurative language. Texas law, where this case was adjudicated, defines rhetorical hyperbole explicitly as extravagant exaggeration employed for rhetorical effect. The judge looked at Figliuzzi's statement and saw exactly that. Was the statement an exaggeration? Yes, clearly. No reasonable person believes Figliuzzi was presenting a scientific analysis of Patel's time allocation, but was it employed for rhetorical effect? Absolutely. The rhetorical point Figliuzzi was making, and that any reasonable viewer would understand him to be making, was that Kash Patel has reportedly been spending significant time in nightclubs rather than focusing exclusively on his duties at the FBI. The underlying factual claim isn't about precise hour counting. The underlying claim is about priorities, about behavior, about a pattern of conduct that has been reported by multiple sources across multiple outlets. The court's reasoning here is a masterclass in how the legal system distinguishes between genuinely defamatory falsehoods and protected political speech. If you drain Figliuzzi's statement of all context and meaning, if you present it on a blackboard the way Patel's lawyers tried to do, you might convince yourself there's a technically false claim embedded in the colorful language. But that's not how defamation law works. The law doesn't ask whether words on a page are literally false in some abstract vacuum. The law asks whether the communication conveys a false meaning, a false impression about the subject. It asks what a reasonable person actually takes away from hearing or reading the statement. And what a reasonable person takes away from Figliuzzi's quip is not, "This man has calculated Patel's hourly schedule." What a reasonable person takes away is, "There are reports that Patel spends considerable time partying instead of working." This distinction is everything. Patel wanted the court to be a first-generation computer that reads language literally and ignores human understanding. The court refused, correctly recognizing that doing so would be unfair to the speaker and untrue to the First Amendment. The First Amendment exists precisely to protect robust political debate, sharp criticism of public officials, and yes, even sarcastic quips delivered on morning television. If every hyperbolic statement could be litigated as defamation, public discourse would grind to a halt. Every politician, every pundit, every journalist would face endless lawsuits from thin-skinned officials who can't tolerate criticism. The broader context of the media narrative surrounding Patel makes the court's decision even more obviously correct. The partier reputation that Figliuzzi referenced didn't emerge from nowhere. It has been documented across multiple news reports. Patel has been photographed hoisting drinks with hockey teams. Sources have described his nightlife activities to various publications. The Atlantic article that triggered his $250 million lawsuit contains extensive reporting on these very patterns. Figliuzzi wasn't inventing a narrative out of thin air. He was commenting in a colorful and attention-getting way on something that was already part of the public conversation about Kash Patel. The Texas court didn't just dismiss the case. It refused to award Figliuzzi court costs and attorney fees, not because Patel's lawsuit had merit, but because Texas law simply doesn't provide for such awards in these circumstances, even though Figliuzzi had requested them. The dismissal stands on its own as a complete rejection of Patel's legal theory. Whether Patel attempts to appeal remains to be seen, but the opinion is well-reasoned, thoroughly grounded in First Amendment law, and consistent with how courts across the country handle similar claims. An appeal would face an uphill battle of the steepest kind. Meanwhile, the separate $250 million lawsuit against the Atlantic is already showing signs of the same fundamental weaknesses. Two rapid developments have emerged that suggest Patel's legal team isn't exactly bringing their A-game to this fight. First, an organization called Democracy Forward has filed a substantial Freedom of Information request seeking all materials related to the allegations in the Atlantic's reporting. They're arguing, reasonably, that this is now a matter of significant public interest. The allegations have been widely reported. The FBI director himself has made them the subject of litigation. The public deserves to see whatever documentation exists. This FOIA request could unearth precisely the kind of evidence that either supports or undermines Patel's denials, and the fact that outside groups are now digging into the factual basis of the reporting adds an entirely new dimension of pressure. Second, and this is where things get genuinely embarrassing for Patel's legal operation, people have started scrutinizing the actual complaint filed against the Atlantic. What they've found doesn't inspire confidence. The complaint contains not just minor typographical errors, but substantive inconsistencies that raise serious questions about its reliability. Most notably, Patel addresses one of the anecdotes from the Atlantic's reporting, a story about his computer shutting off during a meeting, which allegedly caused him to panic that he was being fired. In a news conference, Patel categorically denied this ever happened. He insisted none of it occurred. He claimed his computer was never shut off. Yet in the complaint itself, the document his own lawyers filed with the court, the story changes. The complaint acknowledges that the computer issue did happen, but describes it as a technical problem rather than the ominous sign the Atlantic portrayed it to be. This is a problem. A big one. You cannot simultaneously tell the public this never happened while telling a court it happened but was technical. The inconsistency doesn't just undermine Patel's credibility, it suggests the complaint was not crafted with the kind of precision and care that multi-million-dollar defamation lawsuits demand. A top-tier defamation complaint requires exacting attention to detail, absolute consistency in factual assertions, and a coherent narrative that holds together under scrutiny. What Patel filed appears to fall short of that standard. Observers are already questioning whether the lawsuit was ever really about winning in court or whether it serves a different purpose entirely. This raises a fascinating question about Patel's true motivation. We've seen this playbook before. Donald Trump spent years filing defamation lawsuits against media organizations and political opponents, not because he expected to win in court, but because the lawsuits themselves served a political function. They allowed him to project strength. They allowed him to tell his supporters he was fighting back. They created headlines that treated his denials as newsworthy counterpoints to critical reporting. The legal merits were almost irrelevant. What mattered was the chest-beating performance of filing the suit, the aggressive statements at press conferences, the macho posturing of telling critics, "I'm going to sue your asses." Is Patel running the same play? Is the $250 million lawsuit against The Atlantic less about winning damages and more about creating a narrative that satisfies the maximum leader who appointed him? The dismissal of the Figliuzzi case suggests this strategy has a limited shelf life. Losing defamation cases doesn't make you look strong. It makes you look like someone who can't back up his threats. It creates legal precedents that other critics can cite when you come after them. It demonstrates to the world that your bark is considerably worse than your bite. Every time Patel loses in court, he makes it easier for the next person he threatens to stand their ground and harder for himself to intimidate future targets. The implications for Patel's broader defamation campaign are significant. He has positioned himself as someone who will aggressively pursue anyone who criticizes him, using the legal system as a weapon against speech he doesn't like. But the Texas court just demonstrated that judges can see through this strategy. They can distinguish between genuine defamation and rhetorical hyperbole. They can apply the reasonable person standard in ways that protect political speech. They can dismiss cases that attempt to punish commentators for doing exactly what commentators do in a free society. Patel's loss doesn't just end one lawsuit. It signals to every judge who will hear his future cases that his legal theories are suspect, that his interpretation of defamation law is overly broad, and that his lawsuits may be more about intimidation than legitimate legal claims. The Department of Justice, the very institution Patel was appointed to lead, has a long and proud tradition of defending First Amendment rights, even when it's politically inconvenient. The irony of the FBI director filing defamation lawsuits that courts reject on First Amendment grounds would be almost comical if the stakes weren't so serious. The person charged with upholding the Constitution is using the courts to punish speech protected by that same Constitution. The person who swore an oath to defend the Bill of Rights is trying to weaponize the legal system against the very freedoms that oath requires him to protect. For Frank Figliuzzi, this dismissal clears the path for his return to public commentary. The lawsuit kept him off the airwaves while it was pending, a form of de facto silencing that was likely part of the point of filing it in the first place. Now that cloud has been lifted. He can resume his role as a law enforcement analyst, bringing his decades of FBI experience to bear on the very institution he once served. His absence from MSNBC during the pendency of this case represents exactly the kind of chilling effect that defamation lawsuits can have, even when they ultimately fail. The fact that he can now return to the public square is a victory not just for him personally, but for the principle that public officials cannot silence their critics through litigation. The broader story here extends beyond Kash Patel and Frank Figliuzzi. This is about whether the courts will allow public officials to use defamation law as a tool of intimidation against speech they find uncomfortable. It's about whether the First Amendment's protections for rhetorical hyperbole and colorful political commentary will survive in an era when powerful people increasingly reach for lawsuits as their first response to criticism. It's about whether judges will have the courage to dismiss meritless claims early in the process, before defendants are bled dry by legal fees and forced into settlements they can't afford to fight. The Texas court just answered those questions in the strongest possible terms. The First Amendment still matters. Rhetorical hyperbole is still protected, and Kash Patel's defamation campaign just suffered a defeat from which it may never fully recover.